Welcome to Keeping It Green, a podcast for ornamental plant professionals and enthusiasts, with hosts Margaret, Pickoff, and Tom Butzler.
Hello, and welcome to Keeping It Green, a podcast from Penn State Extension for ornamental plant professionals and enthusiasts. I'm one of your hosts, Margaret Pickoff. I'm a horticulture educator with Penn State Extension, and on each episode, I'll be joined by one of my colleagues on the green industry team as a co-host. On today's episode, my co-host is Tom Butzler. Hello, Tom.
Hey, Margaret.
Thanks for being on today.
Yeah, great to be here.
On today's episode, we'll be joined by Erin Kinley from the Penn State Master Gardener program. But before we get to our interview with Erin, we'll start out with just checking in with one another about what we're seeing out in the field at this time of year, and what looks interesting, what looks scary, what looks sad. So Tom, what are you seeing?
Well, Margaret, anyone that's followed our podcast the past several weeks, couple months, periodically I mentioned this spongy moth issue we're dealing with in central Pennsylvania. So this is the time of year it's coming into fruition, and fruition meaning the spongy moths are showing their work. And so we're starting to see the hillsides turn brown. The leaves, especially those hillsides with a lot of oaks, leaves are off, and you can clearly see the delineation on the hillsides where they sprayed for controlling this insect, and those areas just didn't receive spraying. And so we'll see how bad it gets, and hopefully we get some rain because these trees are stressed out already with this infestation. And then if you throw on a drought, it could lead to some problems. But other than that, I guess I was out in some vegetable fields, and I think the thing of note was some of the growers I interact with and did some of the field walks. I saw some burning of some of the transplants that are on plastic. They were up against black plastic, and we've had some hot, sunny weather, and so some of the stems have damage on them. And I don't know if these plants are going to pull through, but we'll have to see.
Is that something that can usually be avoided if the plants are well irrigated, or that just happens with little seedlings sometimes?
Yeah, I think there's a couple things there. Probably the holes in the black plastic should have been a little larger. And unfortunately, I think we had some windy days. So the plants were kind of being pushed to one side, and they were touching the holes, and I think the wind was there for several days. And so the plants were growing sideways. So I just think it's kind of kind of like the perfect storm on weather events. Now, once these like pepper plants, it was mostly what I saw this on. Once these plants get some foliage to them, a little more leaves on the upper canopy, it shades the stem enough that you don't see that happening.
Okay, gotcha. Yeah, life is rough for those little new transplants. They're just going through lots of stress.
Yeah. Farming's it's a tough business. It's a gamble.
Yeah. Well, nice. Yeah, I've out on the flower farms, I've seen some thrips, lots of thrips.
Yeah.
Big year for them. Saw my first powdery mildew of the season this week. And so those that's one of those fungal diseases that actually doesn't require moisture to germinate on the leaves. But I think so we've had a lot of dry, and then oscillating between it feeling like California weather of hot and dry, and now we're in this kind of like Pacific Northwest cool rainy June, so it's, I'm sure, kind of confusing for a lot of these plants, and probably for a lot of growers. But
with this powdery mildew on this flower farm, is that something that is managed, or do you just try to do it culturally by spacing and airflow, or how?
Yeah, I think this particular farm does not spray anything. And so I think it's mostly cultural management. And then usually for a lot of the flowers that are harvested, the foliage gets stripped off anyways before the plants are, made into a bouquet or an arrangement or sold to a florist or something. And so as long as it doesn't really reach the flower head and doesn't cause too much quality decline. They might just be okay as is, but it's coming. And so just the beginning of weird growing season, but we're in for some more rain this week, which I think will help everywhere.
Yay, rain. We need it.
Yay. Yep. Great. Well, yeah, thanks for being here, Tom, and for checking in. So let's bring on our guest for today. Our guest is Erin Kinley. Erin is an area Master Gardener coordinator in Eastern Pennsylvania for Penn State Extension. So we have the pleasure of working with Erin from time to time. And Erin, welcome to our podcast. Thanks for being on today.
Thanks so much for having me. I've been looking forward to this.
Hey, Erin.
Yay, us too. So we just wanted to start out, if you could just explain what your job is for Penn State Extension, what you do, and what your responsibilities are.
Yeah, absolutely. So I work with our Master Gardener program. And so for those of your listeners who might not be familiar with that program, we are a volunteer program that focuses on providing education on sustainable horticulture to our local communities. We have a county program, or we have a program in every county in Pennsylvania, something that we're really proud of. And so for my role specifically, I supervise 9 full-time and part-time coordinators here in the eastern part of the state. And that is the majority of my job. But then I also get to do fun things like organize our statewide programs for basic training, advanced training, as well as a few other things. Tom, you and I have worked together on our home garden veggie trials. And Margaret, I don't know how involved we've gotten you with the Woody Plant ID certificate yet. That's always on my list. But I get to do a lot of fun educational programs, both for Master Gardeners and the public statewide. So it's a little bit more about what I do here.
That's great. And so I think that the Master Gardener program is actually how a lot of people become familiar with extension, because Master Gardeners tend to be so visible in the community, and they're highly trained, and they're kind of the go-to people when home gardeners have issues. One of the biggest parts of the program, I think across lots of states across the nation, is the garden hotline. And could you talk a little bit about that? And I know that's I think probably an underutilized resource, like many resources at Extension, that that more people should know about and use. But can you talk about the hotline a little bit?
Yeah, absolutely. It's one of my favorite program offerings that we have. And I think many people would say the same, but it is a free service that we provide in every county. Our trained Master Gardeners are either available via email or phone or walk-in, and they can take any kind of horticulture or gardening question from the general public. And most of it, they're trained to answer in-house. Anything that they can't answer on their own, we encourage them to reach out to our horticulture educators like you folks, or send things up to our amazing labs up at Penn State. But last year, and I should have pulled up that number, I mean, we're typically answering 10,000 questions or more statewide from the public every year. Completely free service that we offer. It's like my favorite thing to tell people about when I'm out doing educational events is, do you know about our local garden hotline? But it's a great way, for people to get, especially if they're new to gardening, or even if they've been around for a long time, to, maybe they have this one challenge point that they just can't quite get past, and we're here to help with that. And that's something that our volunteers love to do. And it's just one of our favorite things to provide, because we, can help build a lot of good integrated pest management skills, encourage a lot of best practices, good plant selection, all that kind of stuff. Definitely an unsung hero of the Master Gardener program, but we have been working on promoting it more for sure.
Yeah, it's a great service. Everyone has their expertise. Someone might be a librarian or a math teacher or a plumber. A lot of times people don't know what's going on in their yard or in their garden. And so this is a great way for them to get that question answered. And it takes a burden off of us commercial horticulture educators that are working with, vegetable growers or the landscaping community, and allows us to deal with kind of on a larger scale, and then this volunteer base deal with some of these questions coming from this urban population, or not. I mean, it's still coming from rural folks too. So, yeah, you mentioned the Master Gardener program statewide. How big of an operation, a workforce, volunteer workforce, do you have?
Yeah, thanks for asking that, Tom. We actually have close to 4,000 volunteers statewide now. Can't
Wow.
remember if we've hit the 4,000 mark, but we're at least at like 3,800. So definitely growing. Usually we get about 500 trainees every fall. That's of course spread across the state. And of course, there is a level of attrition with it. It is a really rigorous training. But on average, I would say that we are, bringing in and keeping on at least, 300 new volunteers a year. So we're definitely on an upward trajectory and a fast growing program for right now.
Yeah. So who tends to be, and I'll say that before I was an extension educator, I was a Master Gardener coordinator in New Jersey for Rutgers. And so I kind of know the answer to this question, but I just, so we can, talk about it for the sake of our listeners, but who tends to be somebody who applies for the Master Gardener program? Like, are they all expert gardeners? Are they all people who work in horticulture? Like, who's your average applicant for those trainee positions?
Yeah, I love this question because this is something that I really love working on with our coordinators as they choose basic training classes and as we try to recruit new volunteers. I think everyone's proud who's familiar with the Master Gardener program probably does see us with the stereotype of retired folks, especially retired women. And I am really excited to say that we've seen a shift in that demographic. We're seeing a lot more Gen X, millennial folks who work, as we kind of say, work during the day still. A lot of diversity marketers in, racial diversity, ethnic diversity, income class, all kinds of things. And we've done a big push to offer more hybrid training. So we do lectures online in the evening, and then counties have been scheduling hands-on activities in person for Saturdays or other accessible times. So the average applicant is very different than it was even 5 years ago, I think. And one of the things that we've really focused on, I think historically we did get a lot of folks who saw themselves as expert gardeners. We get a lot of folks who are really interested in continuing their garden education. And that's really excellent to have experts and folks who are really passionate about gardening. We are working to make a shift towards folks, and this has always been a theme, and who joins the program and who sticks on, but we are actively trying to recruit more for people who are excited to volunteer in their communities. If that's the number one thing they list on their application, I love gardening and working with my community. And this is like I was just reading an application yesterday that was like, this is the perfect marriage of the two things that I love to do, serve my community and gardening. And that is our ideal applicant. We also like to say that we can teach anyone botany and plant science. We can't teach everyone to be a people person and to love going out to their community. So we are seeing a really big shift in the types of applicants that we get. We're trying to promote more like, you don't need to be an expert to be a Master Gardener. That's what the training is for. We'll teach you that. If you have other skills like public speaking or teaching, or we love hands-on skills. We're always looking for more folks with carpentry experience, just about anything. If you like plants and have time that you want to give to your community, we absolutely have room for you and would love to have you in the program. You don't have to have as they say, like a green thumb.
Yeah, I've been involved with Extension now for 28 years and, involved with the Master Gardener program to help out with some teaching, like some of the things that you've put together, Erin. But one of the things I've noticed, and it's probably always occurred, but I've seen it just in front of me the past couple of years, individuals go through the basic training. They get this broad breadth of knowledge of horticulture from, insects to diseases to how to plant, propagate, and things like that. But once they're done with their basic training, I see a certain segment of your volunteer workforce that kind of focus on a certain area. They're either drawn to vegetable gardening, and that's what their interest is, and they want to explore that, and they want to disseminate that information. I'm working with a group of Master Gardeners on a pollinator project, And they know more than I do now. I mean, they've got this group and they've got their microscopes and they're going out and doing these collections, and they've focused on something that interests them and then distributes that information through the public newsletters and public speaking. So that's a really neat thing, is that, yeah, you get this broad breadth of knowledge, but if you're something that you really like or enjoy, you have the ability to focus on that.
Absolutely. And that's part of, with our program, to renew your certification every year, it's 20 hours of volunteer service and 10 hours of continuing ed. And that's where, the continuing your education is, such a huge part of being a master gardener. Is, it gives you the opportunity to specialize, but it also makes sure that you're always keeping fresh on new topics. Maybe something that didn't interest you 10 years ago has new things now that make you really excited about it. I think we see, depending on what it is, turf grass is always I will say the least favorite class that we have. And actually, I believe that Sandy Feather here teaches that for us. And we get a lot of folks that come out of that and say, I expected to hate this class, but this was actually really interesting. And it gives me better ideas on how to make this, turf grass management less daunting, or to do it in a way that more aligns with how they like to garden and that kind of thing. So, helping people find new areas of focus is always exciting too, as they grow and develop in their time with us as a volunteer.
Yeah, I as you were saying that, Tom, about, they know more than I do, I actually find that when I'm preparing to teach master gardeners, I really have to prepare myself to answer some very tough questions.
Yep,
and
absolutely.
Maybe even we get a different set of questions from people in the industry that we teach. It's the master gardener questions that are just like, what? I never thought of that particular question that you asked. And, and I think that's a testament to, it's just a very passionate group of people who are just, really, really interested in these topics. And the program kind of allows them to dive really deeply into not necessarily a narrow focus, but just it really celebrates the sort of self-propelled learning and taking the basic training and running with it and coming up with a new garden project or a new citizen science project or something like that, which I think is a huge benefit to the program. So it's not as though you're taking this training, learning, XYZ, and then regurgitating it over and over to the same people. It really, there's so much creativity there and so much excitement. And really people who just love to help others and love to teach. It's pretty inspiring, and it keeps us educators on our toes, I think, with all those hard questions. So
so I, as a nerd, I made some notes before we came into this, kind of tying into some of that too. And, master gardeners, being really aware of what's going on in their community and interfacing and asking really good questions to educators. I think that's an area where I would love to see us grow more, not just in interacting with educators, but also interacting more directly with commercial horticulture and the green industry. Where, master gardeners are really excellent touch points in their communities to know, what is trending right now? What are people really interested in? What might be coming up in the next year or two? I find that master gardeners are maybe a couple years ahead of what usually the public trend is going to be. And I know, Tom, one of the things that we've talked about with the home garden veggie trials, so for a little background on that for folks, we are having master gardener demonstration gardens trial 5 different variety of peppers in their demo gardens to collect data on what performs best in more of a home garden setting. But one of the outcomes that we'd like to see from that is being able to take that data, not just to help home gardeners figure out what pepper is going to work best for them, but also to provide that education to commercial folks to be like, hey, if you want, if you're choosing varieties to sell to the public, this is, we recommend these because these were what was working best in home gardens in the last couple of years. And I would love to see us, I feel like we've just started scratching that surface, and I would love to continue to do more of that, because I think there's so much opportunity for us to, support the industry and kind of be that link between what's happening in the public and what public needs are, and, hopefully helping the commercial industry and the green industry meet those needs and to help us kind of optimize their businesses like that.
Yeah, I like that because Erin, you talk about us commercial or hort educators such as myself and Margaret. There's only 15 of us, Margaret, maybe 20, but you've got a volunteer force. You threw out that number, 4,000. And so, yes, I mean, you're in every little niche of the state and able to, as you said, touch points. So some good information could be gained from your volunteers. So, you talked about the Master Gardener program for the general public and maybe some of the people that are applying for the Master Gardener program. Sometimes there's this misconception on what a Master Gardener is and what a garden club is. Is that something you run across or have to dispel or to kind of talk about the difference so that people realize what they're getting into?
Yeah, for sure. So I guess two angles I'll kind of come at that from. So we have for a long time had the misconception of being a garden club. And I think that's something that we've really done a great job of starting to combat in recent years in what types of programs we offer, making sure all the programs that we have some amount of science-based research in them. If a good example is if a program wants to do a class on, essential oils or something like that, making sure we're talking about actual plant care and being like, hey, like these are plants that are easy to grow. Here's how to best to culture them if that's what you want to do. And so really trying to promote that we're here for Extension's mission, which is research-based education in our communities. So that's kind of adjusting the public perception that we have. And then as far as folks coming into the program, we don't see that perception as much as we used to, but something that we've really emphasized in the last 3 to 4 years, especially here in the Southeast, where we get a lot of people interested in the program. We will do information sessions, typically as webinars, sometimes in person. So if a county is going to recruit a basic training class, they'll have a public information session. And we, in many cases, are requiring folks to attend that information session before they even apply to the program. So they know what they are, what it is that they are getting into. And one of the things that we've started to see ourselves more as is, we're, in many cases, we're always going to have more people than we have spots for in our programs, especially here in the Southeast. But we like to think of ourselves as trying to find the right volunteer or education opportunity for everyone. So if someone is looking for something that is more garden club-like, things that are like particularly social, you might do more craft-based activities, that kind of thing. If that's something that someone's really interested in, and we might decide that they're not the right fit for our program, but we absolutely make recommendations of like, hey, here are the local garden clubs. Here's how to contact the Garden Club of America. For folks that really just want, one of the other things we actually get too are folks that really just want to get their hands on the dirt and do garden maintenance, which is really excellent. But all of our volunteer opportunities need to have an education component to them. So they need to be educating others. And so if someone's like, I really just want to help garden all day, that's awesome. And we actually have started providing folks like a list of like, hey, here is a local arboretum who needs that. Or, we've had folks who are really interested in organics and connecting them with Rodale. And so it's been really, at least I found it really exciting to, instead of being like, sorry, we don't have room for all of you, you're not the right fit for this, to be like, hey, like your interests are really cool and really valid. You would be such a better fit in this other place, whether it's a garden club or somewhere else in their community. And that's a role that I think we've just started to kind of take on in the last few years. And it's something I hope we continue to grow, is to help people find the right meaningful horticulture experience for them in their lives.
Yeah, that's a great point. And that's certainly something that comes up a lot. I can say as a former coordinator that there are some folks who are better suited to other organizations. And I think there is something about the sort of maybe clout of, or perceived clout of, being an official master gardener. And that I know that name kind of carries a lot of connotations, and you get a badge, an official badge. And that's something I've also encountered is people who, are really interested in the title, and we have to continually remind, the volunteers, like you're a volunteer for your community. This is you mentioned the mission of extension, but it all has to come back to that point. So any of the work you're doing really has to be rooted in that service to the community and using science-backed information. I think that was probably one of the more challenging parts of training Master Gardener volunteers, is sort of because everyone comes into horticulture with different ideas about how it should be done. And when it comes down to it, as an extension volunteer, it's your role to provide clients that come in with the best information possible for them to make the best decision for themselves, and not really to convince someone one way or the other, but to provide, these are the best practices for sure. This is what we know works from the research. This is what Penn State recommends. But certainly people who, I think this comes up a lot around the use of pesticides or the use of organic practices versus non-organic practices. And that seems to be tough for some incoming volunteers to kind of shed some of that sort of desire to shape the client's gardening path rather than providing information. And so that has kind of always struck me as an interesting challenge of the people providing the training for volunteers and sort of reinforcing that training. There's a billion different ways to garden. And I don't know. Did you have any thoughts on that?
Absolutely. I have several thoughts.
Yeah.
But so first and foremost, one of the questions that we ask in the interview process. So for folks who weren't familiar, when people apply to do the Master Gardener program, they do an application, and then we also do interviews to make sure that they are going to be a good fit. And if
Wow.
one of the things, so everyone goes through an interview process. Now, even if you are a county with like 10 seats open and you only have 5 applicants, you're still interviewing those 5 people, because it's a way for us to set those expectations. So one of the questions we specifically ask, and it's really more of a statement, is at some point in time, you may be called upon to recommend the use of pesticides if that's what research shows is the best option. Is that something you're comfortable doing? And so usually in 99% of cases, we end up having really good conversations with people about, what they're comfortable with as far as what they do in their own gardens and what they're comfortable recommending. And it's actually a really good teaching point to have a conversation about integrated pest management, which is always like, such a long term for, what is, I think, a core principle of so much of what we do in horticulture. And that's really where we get to feel people out. Like, are they, are people really rigid in what they like to recommend? How do they feel about, research-based methods? And that's something that we emphasize all the time, is recommendations that we make need to have a basis in something. And we also try and talk about how, like, you can do whatever you want in your home garden. You can go wild, do whatever. But we're here to make research-based recommendations. And that's something that I even do, like, in my teaching for the Master Gardeners. This year's the first year that I taught our plant diagnostics for our basic training. And I always emphasize, like, these are the research-based, this is integrated, this is the integrated pest management approach. Here are the different options of what you can do and provide. But you can do, like, again, here are your options. You can do what you want in your garden. It might be different from what someone else does. Our job is just to provide best practices, and people are going to do what they want to do. But that's something that we've been very intentional about in the last several years, especially.
Well, and that's so important too, I think, with the internet being so easily accessible and there being so much information out there that is really not research-based. And I'm thinking, specifically of home remedies for, make your own herbicide out of, vinegar, or treat your this disease with baking soda or diluted whatever it is from somebody's garden blog, and it's more anecdotal than science-based, but it's the first thing that comes up if you Google something, maybe. And so I sort of see master gardeners as the sort of I don't know, the providing grounding people in the research rather than sort of going to the internet first. And there's a lot of good information on the internet too, but there's certainly a lot of training done on how to find reliable information, because a lot of those home remedies, some of them they can be dangerous, and
They'll make
not
it worse.
only
They make problems worse. Yeah,
they
absolutely.
can cause phytotoxicity, or they can be dangerous for wildlife or dangerous for pets or kids. And if you're using something as a pesticide that's not labeled as a pesticide, that's against the law, kind of. It's not labeled for that use. So I think that master gardeners have a really really important purpose there in counteracting some of that misinformation that's on the internet that's so readily accessible for
Yeah. And that's where, something that we do have some outlets for it, but part of it is when the public or an individual is so it's so ingrained that you can type a question into Google or post it on Facebook and you can get an immediate response. It might not be the right one, but you're going to have something right away. It's really hard to be like, okay, maybe don't do that, but send us an email and stuff that, our master gardeners are pretty quick in most counties. They usually get back within a day or two, but we live in a world where people want instant gratification, and waiting a day or two is really, really hard to kind of talk people down from. We do have our Facebook group that is moderated by master gardeners from all across the state, where people can post pictures and questions. It's almost like an online hotline in a way, and anyone in that group can post an answer. So some of it's a little iffy, but we have master gardeners who are assigned at specific times to moderate those posts and put the correct information. Be like, hello, I am the master gardener moderating here. This is the science-based research. So we have tried to create some avenues to help us meet, if the public wants an immediate answer, as much as we want them to email us with photos and details, we're trying to meet them where they're at, even if it drives us insane just a little bit. But that's something that I know that we can always be better about, is trying to meet people where they're at instead of where we want them to be.
Yeah, I think Margaret mentioned it earlier that master gardeners, want to be associated with that name, master gardener, or she mentioned also the name tags. I have to say, the past couple of years, the swag that master gardeners are starting to wear, hats and T-shirts, announcing who they are, has really picked up. So that's kind of neat. So you had mentioned that you're also teaching. So you are coordinating some of these master gardener coordinators in various counties. But you're also doing some teaching. So you have some horticulture background. So I'm always kind of interested. What interested you in horticulture, and what was your journey to kind of get where you are now?
Yeah. How much time do we have left? I mean, and most of it's pretty straightforward. I actually grew up on a farm in Nebraska. It was a very typical Nebraska row crop farm. My family managed and still manages to this day about 3,000 acres of corn, soybeans, and about 100 cow-calf pairs for beef cattle. So I grew up on a farm. We actually didn't do a lot of gardening. Gardens were, at least in our family, they were significantly less important than, the thousands of acres of corn and soybeans. So I was never super involved with gardening growing up, but I was in our local FFA chapter and 4-H and all that good stuff. And I always loved working with plants. And so kind of on a whim, I decided to look at the horticulture program at University of Nebraska-Lincoln and absolutely loved it. And so that's what I did my bachelor's in, horticulture plant science, while I was at UNL, University of Nebraska-Lincoln. And actually, while I was there, I did a lot of lab work. I worked for UNL's soybean research program, doing both field work and then eventually DNA analysis with PCR and different things for their breeding program. And then I also worked for a lab that did more molecular biology, looking at iron uptake and how pH affects that. And by the end of that 4 years, I had really realized that as much as I love plants, I like talking to other people about plants more than I like running little experiments on them. And so that's where kind of really by coincidence, I started looking into public horticulture. And my advisor at the time was from New Jersey originally, and she knew of the Longwood graduate program at the University of Delaware, which was a fully funded grad program to get a master's of science. And so I applied to that program. I was one of the youngest to interview, actually, I think the youngest to interview that year, and was able to make it in. And there was a cohort of 5 people in our class. And so at the age of, I just turned 22, I packed everything I could into my new Subaru Forester and moved halfway across the country to where I knew absolutely no one. And it was great. It turned out great. I did my master's of science in public horticulture. My thesis research was actually on food systems education at public gardens in particular, and extension was a big part of what I looked at in that. And even though here in the Southeast, Philadelphia is America's garden capital. We have a ton of gardens. Many gardens across the country are working really closely with their extension systems to provide not just education. What I was really interested in is, are we just providing education on like how to grow a tomato or to have like a nice cooking class? Like, are we also talking about things like food policy and some of these the actually bigger players in our food system than just like, it's great if everyone can grow a tomato at home, but like, do you know why tomatoes are so cheap or so expensive at the store versus other, like some of the bigger picture conversations. But really just, I love looking at how we, interpret plants for the public. That was a really big part of my research. And then especially urban agriculture was a big piece of that. So I finished my master's. I did a brief stint at a nonprofit in Wilmington, Delaware. And then just over 5 years ago, the Montgomery County Master Gardener, Master Watershed Steward Coordinator position opened up. So I was fortunate to be hired into that role. And I was in there for a little over a year, and then they opened the area coordinator position. So I just celebrated 5 years with Extension in February, and I love what I do here.
Wow. And so you had mentioned that the reason you kind of came to this part of the country from Nebraska was that Longwood master's program, which I believe is that still I know it's still functioning in some iteration, but maybe a little bit different from
different. Yes. Okay. So they have Longwood transitioned their program to not have the master's component anymore. So University of Delaware has been focusing more on its bachelor's in landscape architecture, which they've really ramped up that program. It was really excellent. And then Longwood has a 13-month fellowship program. It's cohort-based, similar to how the master's program was, where, there are group projects and stuff that you work on. It's really focused on professional development, a lot of nonprofit and garden administration. It's less focused on, doing certain projects in the garden, and it is more, I actually just went to their annual fellows presentation. I have it written down what their topic was this year. It was cultivating financial resiliency, sowing the seeds of innovation and earned revenue. So they're really looking at big picture things and garden administration, which I think is really cool. So if anyone listening is really interested, maybe you've always done more of a hands-on horticulture focus and you want to move into more administration or something like that, highly recommend checking out the Longwood Fellows program. They take people from all backgrounds. One of the nice things is, since it no longer is a master's program, you can come in with a lot of different levels of education and just do the 13-month fellowship. So I'll make a plug for that for anyone who's interested in, getting more into administration.
Right. Because that's a completely different set of skills than than you would that you would get, if you're working with plants every day and you are working with soil and you're working in garden, exhibits or interpretation and education, those sorts of the business side of things, that in thinking about financials and nonprofit management, that's a whole different skill set. So kind of
Absolutely.
interesting that they're providing that sort of training. And I'll admit, like, I am a LinkedIn snooper. So when I'm interested in someone, I go to their LinkedIn page, and I'm sure people see me snooping on their profiles, but it is amazing. Just, so many people who are associated with public gardens in the Philly area and in the wider, metropolitan region, have some connection to either the Fellows Program or the Longwood Masters Program or the Public Horticulture Program. So just huge influence that that institution has had on public gardens in, this wide region. So right. So that's separate from the public horticulture program, which is more of a hands-on training, from what I understand.
Yeah, so I think you might be referring to the professional horticulture
right.
program. So that's their 2-year program that has, I believe that you can matriculate into like an associate's degree pretty easily from it. I don't think it's like fully, like you don't come out of it with a specific degree, but it used to be known as the professional gardener program. Most professional horticulturalists don't always go by professional gardener, adding kind of a level of professionalism to that, for lack of a better word. So the professional horticulturalist program is 2-year hands-on. There is coursework that goes with it. So there are classes and that kind of thing. But it's also, rotating through all the different areas of, Longwood Gardens to get experience in each. So that is, if, someone's looking to, for, I think they see folks from all ages in there. It is typically folks who are, like, I would say under 30, or at least it was when I went, that's what I think it was when I went through the program 5, 6, 7 years ago, 8 years ago. So maybe that's shifted, but it's really designed for folks starting out their horticulture career, want to do hands-on and want a higher level of training, especially for public garden settings.
Interesting. Yeah, you've had a really cool path to get to extension, which I feel like if talking to people who wind up as educators at extension, we often do have sort of, so we start out kind of focusing on one thing and then wind up focusing on a different industry or a different part of horticulture than we went into. But it seems like you're still able to do some of that food systems work. And I know that that you're passionate about social justice issues too, and bringing that into the Master Gardener program and focusing on those big picture issues, as well as the smaller stuff and how to grow plants, and which I think is really cool and admirable.
Yeah, and I will say that's one of the things I love about this job is that it's less, I think it's easy for anyone to be like, yes, I like social justice. But, I feel like, especially, in working with coordinators and how we set up our programs, I feel like we're able, just thinking about how we make horticulture inclusive for everyone and welcoming for everyone, simple things like, Tom, I think you kind of caught some of this too. Like, when we're planning programs, the one that comes to mind is our Woody Plant ID certificate. We have all these new master gardeners who work during the day, and that's by encouraging doing these evening online trainings. Yep. And then making sure our continuing ed matches that. So we do plant walks as part of our modules for Woody Plant ID. And this year I made a really big push to have as many as possible on evenings or weekends. And I always feel bad asking that from our educators, because all of us have lives and families as well. But the increase in participation that we've seen in those modules since offering evening and weekend walk times has been absolutely insane. And so just little things like that we can do to make it just easier for someone to sign up for a class it's one of my favorite things. It's, some of these things don't have to be hard. It can just be, moving a scheduled evening around a little bit, and it makes so many people happy that it's really
So Erin,
joy.
when you ask me to lead a plant walk, whether it's in the evening or on the weekend, you're telling me I get paid to walk around and talk about plants. I love it. I mean,
we do love it.
yeah, you can walk around for 2 hours and talk about plants, what you like. Some of the plants I don't like, and I let them know, but that's fun.
Well, and
You
it's
can tell them
more
you don't
than-
like them. That's okay.
Oh
too.
yeah, I tell them. I say, look, this is just my opinion, but this tree here,
Yeah,
but-
it's more than likely what we would all be doing on our weekends anyways, is just walking around looking at plants and telling people about plants. So
Definitely.
yeah,
And that's
plant
where-
nerds.
Master gardeners are just, I hear this from educators as well, as they're so fun to work with because they all want to be there. I have never gone to a class and someone is clearly just doesn't want, is not interested. They have signed up for a reason. It's why I love working with adults, is they have made that active choice to be there and they're excited about it. Sometimes it comes with a lot of opinions on how things are done, but they all really want to be there and are excited to be there. And it makes such a huge difference, when teaching, and hopefully it sounds like it makes, your jobs easier too, to have an enthusiastic audience.
Oh, definitely. Yeah. And yeah, just going back to what you said before, since this is a green industry podcast, and thinking about ways so it's clear, the benefit to homeowners from master gardeners is really clear. And I think there is a big benefit to the green industry as well, even though we kind of at Extension divide the homeowners from the industry, especially when we're offering programs. They're usually geared more towards the professional crowd or homeowners, and master gardeners kind of fall in between there. But just thinking through it, I mean, master gardeners also tend to be some of the first people in the state who might have eyes on a new emerging issue. Like you said, that number again, 4,000 people who have been trained to a pretty high degree in horticultural topics are seeing samples that customers are bringing in. Sometimes customers bring them to a nursery, and then the nursery will turn around and call Extension. But oftentimes when people see something weird in their yards, they're bringing it to the hotline or they're bringing it to the office. And so they're, just from a diagnostic point of view and keeping an eye on what's happening throughout the state, that's really important. And what you said before about being influential to potential customers, I feel, and I don't have any data to back this up, but I feel like a lot of the hype around native plants, I think a lot of that comes from Master Gardener programming and their excitement around providing habitat for, wildlife and nectar and resources for pollinators. And they're going out there to libraries and parks and giving talks, and people are turning around and asking their nurseries to supply native plants. So I think their influence is huge on the industry, whether we or the industry realizes it. So certainly, something we can continue to work on is bolstering that connection, but they're a huge resource for sure.
Absolutely.
Yeah. Well, great. So on that note, on our industry wrap up there, we're getting towards the end of our conversation here, and I think, I'm sure we could ask you a whole lot more questions about the Master Gardener program. I know there's a lot of information online, and people can reach out to their local extension office and local Master Gardener coordinator for more information if they're interested in applying. But we really appreciate you coming on the show, Erin, and we like to sort of end our conversations on a personal note and ask our guests what they like to do when they're not working. So I'll pose that question to you now.
Awesome. Yeah, I'm a huge nerd. I love to read. Whenever I'm not working, if I'm not doing something out in my garden, I am reading. I read constantly. Fiction. I hate nonfiction. I live in nonfiction. I don't want to read it too. That's sci-fi. Usually I've been on a big sci-fi fantasy kick. Lots of really good stuff from particularly women authors and authors of color right now in the fantasy world. We were seeing a lot more representation there. So if you've ever tried sci-fi fantasy before and you're like, man, this is just the same Lord of the Rings story all over again, highly recommend seeing what else is out there right now. But I love to read. That's what I'm doing when I'm not here.
Oh, that's wonderful to hear. Well, hopefully in the rainy days ahead, you'll have plenty of good reading time and
Got
good,
a whole
good
stack.
fantasy, reading. Great. Well, thank you, Erin. This was so fun.
Thanks
We
so
loved
much for
having
having
you.
me.
Yes,
And,
thanks, Erin.
Really appreciate you being on the show today. All right. Take care.
Thank you.